Welcome to Winning Inside, the show where we follow the journey from feeling defeated to winning. Here are your hosts, Cheddy Matthews and Michelle Wickman.
Hello, amazing people. Welcome to the Winning Inside podcast, where we discuss real issues, topics, and solutions to help you regain your spark. We know life happens, and we can choose to be a spectator or a participant.
These conversations and stories are about the participants, the ones who made the choice to do the inner work and found a way to keep moving forward.
So today we're going to talk about identity, what it is to us, what it can mean, and how it can affect the way we are and how we exist in the world. So Michelle, what is the definition of the word identity?
Well, there's a few, and we landed on Cambridge.org dictionary that states the fact of being. Identity is the fact of being or feeling that you are a particular type of person, the qualities that make a person different from others.
Nice. And I can give you some examples of that. It could be said that in prison, people often suffer from a loss of identity. Or, I think my job gives me a sense of identity. Another one could be, it was important for me to carve out an identity separate from my husband's. And also there's cultural, national, and ethnic identity as well.
So these were all examples that were provided on that site, the Cambridge Dictionary. And the particular reason why we selected this definition of the noun identity is because those examples really brought the sort of well-known concepts and ideas of what identity is in our society. And that's what we wanted to address. That's what we wanted to touch on is like, what is identity? And specifically that identity is unique to each individual. And it mentions in here, this is a big one for me, is that it's almost in relation to the people around you, right? So even in the definition, it says the qualities that make a person different from others.
Correct.
And yet, in that definition, keeps us separate from other people, one. So it creates this like idea or concept that we are separate from other people.
Yes.
And then also that it's in relation to other people versus that my identity is mine.
Yes.
And regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the people that I'm around, regardless if there were no people around me, my identity can and will be the same, right?
Yes.
However, that's not necessarily the case in the real world because we are often impacted and affected by our circumstances, including the people that are around us.
Yes. We wear many hats, and it's interesting how if you were a fly on the wall and watch somebody's life throughout the day, you would actually see the different lives that they live, the different hats that they wear. So you realize that we say we have an identity, but that depends on who we're talking to and what we want to highlight about ourselves and what we want to showcase and what that group values in an identity. Because you may mention some things and the group may be like, well, that's irrelevant, who cares? But yet you go to another circle, another sphere, and yet you say the same things and they laud you for it. They applaud you. They praise you for it. They give you a lot of respect based on the things you said. So I think being that we get that feedback from people based on our identity, we do change, maybe not our identity, but the highlights that we showcase and what we put forward as we speak to other people. Now, with that, how do you, this is just a question for you, Michelle. How do you formulate identity throughout life? How does it go for you?
Well, most people, and myself included, would look at it as identity is really an evolution. So, as children, we are heavily influenced by our authority figures, including our parents, older siblings, teachers have a huge impact and influence on our lives. And so in a previous training that I participated in, one of the exercises that we did that the coach led me through was this concept called timelining. And I think it might mean something different to different training programs, depending on what you're in.
Right.
But you go back through your childhood, through your formative years, and you try to pinpoint a time or a moment where something significant happened and you made a decision as a young child, you made a decision like, I don't want this. Right. And so the example that they offered was in elementary school, you had an interaction with a teacher. And in that interaction, the teacher made a statement, you're not very good at math.
Yeah.
And at that point, the child decided, I'm not very good at math. So I'm going to focus my pursuits or energy elsewhere, right? Yes. And they had this belief system that they're not good at math. And so going forward, they continue to avoid math and focus on these other areas of education, whether it's English or, whatever, right? And so they became
confirmation bias. Definitely confirmation bias.
Yeah. And they became incredibly, accomplished, let's say, in writing or whatever it is, because they had this thought that I'm not good at these other things and I am good at these things. So that became part of their identity that they continue to evolve over time. One example that was also given was like, you have a very disorganized room from your parent,
yes.
Right? You're incredibly disorganized and this is an incredible disappointment. And so it was either the acceptance of I'm a disorganized person and I continue to be disorganized, or it's the rejection of that. And they became the most incredibly organized child, right? In order to get the praise from their parents or teacher or whatever it is. And therefore that became part of their identity. Exactly. I am an organized person is now part of my identity.
So feedback, societal feedback or familial feedback has a significant impact on the way that we see ourselves and the way that people see us. The way that we put ourselves forward and the way we put ourselves out there is really affected by the things that people say to us, the feedback we receive. And it's interesting because we can give, if we were to do a study and you were to give 1,000 children the same negative feedback, I would probably guess that half of them would probably go one way and half would go the other. And it may be different, but there's a choice that's made. And if you were to ask them what happened, they could probably tell you, if they could recollect the moment in the event. Based on what was said, I decided to accept that and believed it and lived that life and adjusted my life accordingly. Or I refuted that and refused for that to be my narrative and changed and did something else. I will tell you, I've done both. My career in the military was really based on some people that said that there are things that you couldn't do based on my demographics. I was like, oh, game on. It was a challenge. And I always ensured that those were things that I would excel in. And that was as a teenager for me, but that changed the trajectory of my life and my career. But I've had other examples of things like that, where you've accepted what was said or where you haven't. And sometimes I'm not going to say it's good or bad. It just is. But it does change the course of people's lives and the outcome of their lives and the activities they focus on, the aptitudes they have, the things they focus on, which can affect your occupation and your habits and your hobbies, likes and dislikes. So really, it is a huge thing. And I don't always know if people are qualified to give us the assessments that we base our lives off of. But it doesn't matter. We still base our lives off of what we're told. I know of an individual who was told, handsome individual, who was told he was ugly in junior high. And 40 years later, that still affects him. Handsome human being. But it's not what we see, it's what he was told and what he believed at the time. And it's interesting how something that happened 4 decades ago can still affect an individual. But that's the effect that things can have on us, whether we accept it, adopt it, or refute it and go in the opposite direction. But there are other ways that we get our identity. I know growing up, I was known as the kid that could run fast. And I owned that because it was always, let's go race. All right, let's go race. So that would be based on unique gifts, traits, or abilities. My son could play the drums at 2. And I think a lot of growing up, he was known as a drummer. And it was interesting. My daughter was the dancer, the ballerina. So we do adopt certain things. And it's strange to me now that he doesn't play the drums anymore. He's been playing for 15 years and stopped. And for me, it was like, but that's what you are. That's who you are. And I realized, no, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. That's what I put on him because I had attached his skill to part of his identity. But as he grew up in his formative years, he realized, well, that's not what I want to do anymore. I don't have the same passion for it, and I'm not going to do it going forward. That was actually a shock to me because I personally had attached his skills at playing the drums to part of his identity, which he didn't accept, which is beautiful because it's his journey, not mine. And once I understood that, I stopped asking questions about it. And hey, I'd love to hear you play, but if that's not your thing, that's okay. It's quite all right. So I can see how that changes.
And you made a statement there. It was very quick, very simple. And this is the key point of identity. He said, I don't want to do that anymore.
Yes.
And doing and being are two totally different things.
Yes.
And when we associate our identities with the things that we do, we are setting ourselves up for moments of time where identity loss becomes a real painful experience.
Yes.
And so this is where, empty nest syndrome comes in. When people retire from significant careers, and I know you have experience with this.
Oh, yes.
That when your identity is wrapped into the things that you do, then when that changes and identity loss becomes very real.
Yes.
And it can be quite traumatic. And sometimes coping mechanisms can become maladaptive, right?
Of course.
And what that is essentially, people will try to avoid these feelings of this loss of identity and really dive into something else. And sometimes those maladaptive coping mechanisms can be drinking, it could be drugs, things of that nature. It could be things that are perceived as healthy, like exercise
yes.
and things of that nature. But anything that's done to an extreme in order to avoid feeling feelings that are painful, it is a maladaptive coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
So that being said, identity is a state of being. It's not a state of doing. And that is probably the key component to when I discuss identity with my clients, that, we want to look at your state of being, your core values, the things that you carry with you, no matter what your circumstances are. And an example is when, people identify as parents and their whole identity is, my whole identity is being a mom, let's say.
Yes.
And then my son graduates high school and he goes on to college and his own adult life. What is happening with my life now?
Yes.
And that can be a real challenge. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's why there is the term empty nest syndrome.
It's true. Yes.
So, yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on that state of being versus doing?
Well, I know this well, and I always talk about be, have, and do. You have to know who you are and how you exist and who you are in your own space. You've got to know that. And when I say have, I don't really think about the things you have, but it's really the traits that you possess. Know what they are. So you know who you are. I am the be. I have compassion, intellect, this, whatever those traits are, those positive things about you that you possess. And then you go into the do, be, have, and do. And because I am Cheddy, who has this ability to do this thing, I do this thing in life. And what that does is instead of associating your identity to what you do, I am an executive in this company. I have a lot of money, therefore I am. That puts you in a different space, because when you lose those things that can be fleeting at times, those things that aren't inherently you feel at a loss. But when you focus on you first, and I will tell you, focusing on yourself is a powerful thing. And the most powerful words in the language, any language, if you ask me, arguably, I'm going to say it, they are I am. And why are those two words so powerful? Because whatever you put behind those two words can really dictate the course of your life, because your subconscious mind is hearing it and is going to apply what you say. And this is why I try to steer away from self-deprecation, because it's cute, it's disarming, it's very attractive to some people. But I think on some level, you can attach a part of your identity to what you said. And if it's detrimental, that can be damaging. So I try to be very careful about what I say behind the I am, because I may consciously know that I'm being quippy or witty and trying to be amusing, but subconsciously, very obediently, I'm going to be that thing. And if it's a negative word I've used, then you are somewhat self-sabotaging yourself or aiming towards a goal that on the conscious mind, you don't even realize you've done. So it's one of those things I'm trying to be very mindful of what I say behind the I am. It's why I love affirmations. It's why I start my day with affirmations, to really force out and leave no space for negative thoughts to come in to that space when I'm talking about myself and my identity and where I am, where I want to be, where I see myself. Because there's enough negativity around us that I want to put positive stuff in there as far as my identity goes and as far as me trying to bolster that so I can put my best foot forward when I step out into the world or when I look at myself in the mirror, which is just as important.
So how do you formulate the phrase I am around identity specifically?
I look at things that I like about myself. I also look at things that I want to be real, my desires, and I speak about them in the present tense. And I started doing that as I didn't realize I was doing it, but I did that as a kid. When I was younger, I would do that. And it really manifested itself when I became a track athlete. When I started running, I would win races in my head before I had the races. And then I realized I would apply that to other parts of my life. I also realized later when I didn't apply it, things either happened haphazardly, or if I put a negative thought in there, that thing would tend to happen more often than not. So I realized there's something to this. I have to be what I think somewhat happens. So that was my 2 cents on that.
Give me a specific example. I'm going to push you into a specific example of, you said that you were saying this as a track athlete, right? Which is a doing versus a being. Mm-hmm. But how would you formulate, like if you wanted to give the listeners a specific example of how you would formulate the I am around identity that would help your performance in your doing state versus your being state?
Okay, good one. So I might say something like, I am accepted. And that may come if I'm in a place where I'm new and I'm starting a new school, starting a new job, I'm starting a new position, and I'm very uncertain about who I am and how I fit in that space. I'm going to tell myself that I am accepted. And the reason I'll say that is because once I say I'm accepted, I'm going to walk in that. I'm going to feel accepted. And if you feel accepted, somehow acceptance comes. But you have to believe that thing from within first, because the world within becomes the world without, or on the outside. Not even the right way to say that, without, but you know what I mean. What happens on the internal, what you think internally can really dictate your external world. Another one I would say would be things when I was going through my shoulder surgery. I had a shoulder surgery about 2 years ago, and it was major. They did a lot of cutting and pasting, scraping, chopping and moving stuff, and it still is in rehabilitation now. And we would say things like, I am healthy, I am strong, I am healed, I am recovered, I am totally recovered. And I would say these things to prolong the recovery.
Okay, that's a great example. Can you give our listeners an example of using the I am statement around identity? For the example that you use, that you used it as a track athlete, right?
Yes.
So can you give me an example of how you would use that?
Yes. I am a track athlete. I am a coach. I mean, not coach. I am a captain of this team. And my performance is going to help the other team members to elevate their performance. I'm a winner, and I expect that we're going to win today. And I'm going to do my absolute best to do that because I am a winner. I don't accept anything but winning. I know exactly what to do. I have all the skills to do it. And I'm going to go and work through that thing. And because I am Cheddy Ched, the trackhead, as they used to call me. And that was part of my identity. Yes, I was the trackhead. That was all I knew how to do. It's the only sport I could do. It's the only sport I can still do. So, but that was who I was. And that was a real thing to me. That meant something. If I was called the trackhead, that meant something. And
so that became part of your identity.
Absolutely. A huge part.
Which is interesting because I want to offer the other side of that perspective. Yeah. Which is for me, growing up playing competitive volleyball, you are constantly, and this is not just volleyball. I'm just using volleyball in my experience because it's firsthand versus like generalized statements. Gotcha. But you're constantly being provided feedback from your coaches, feedback from the fans, feedback from your teammates, feedback from literally just how well you pass the ball. I know if I do this, it's going to land here, and so on and so forth. So I'm constantly honing my craft. Yes. And I'm seeking validation, right?
Exactly.
And seeking acceptance. And it became such an incredibly important part. And you can't see my face, but I am pausing stating these words because it was who I was.
Mm-hmm.
My identity was so wrapped up in my doing that I had no idea what my being was, right?
Yeah.
And so when volleyball ended, as it eventually does, and I didn't have that anymore, a couple things had transpired. One, you're seeking that sort of feedback, right? Mm-hmm. And so whether it was in relationships, friendships, in activities that I would do, some of the discomfort that I experienced, I certainly covered it up with some maladaptive coping mechanisms.
Of course.
And that was an incredible challenge for me. It took years to really sort of separate myself from that. And part of that process was I just completely stepped away from the sport. I couldn't even play it casually because it was just incredibly difficult for me to even just step on the court and just mess around and play and have fun. I couldn't even do that. It was such a huge part of who I was. It was difficult. It was incredibly difficult to separate myself from that.
Oh, yeah.
And the process of developing a clear sense of my own identity came down to, believe it or not, working at Lululemon.
Yes, I believe it.
And we've talked a little bit about this.
Yeah.
But Lululemon,
explain.
Whatever you think of it, it's a clothing line, right? So they have retail establishments, brick and mortar, they have online sales, whatever. I worked in a store and they took us through goal setting, vision setting, and identifying core values. And this was the first time I had ever been introduced to this concept of core values. And it was great to go through this idea of core values, but I was so fascinated with it that I have to understand this more. And I took different courses on it. I did more research on it and really, learning and realizing that all of these different coaches, these professors in colleges, they all had these different ideas of what core values were. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, they're similar, but there were like little nuances that were slightly different.
Yes.
However, just getting clear on what these values were so that you had an anchor that when circumstances change around you, and they do because life is at times chaotic, as we've learned in the last few years, right? It is unpredictable, but no matter what the circumstances are around you, you can anchor yourself to these values that you want to and know you are capable of showing up in the world as.
Yes.
Right. So integrity being one of my
cornerstones.
I mean, it is the value that since day one, when I learned about core values, that I said, yes, integrity, that is 100% what I want and what I know I'm capable of.
Yes.
And I don't always show up with integrity, particularly with myself.
Yourself.
So that is probably another conversation. But as it relates to identity, it's again, I like to go back to the doing versus being. I was doing, I was playing volleyball, but I identified as an athlete.
Yes. And
when I no longer was an athlete, I had no sense of purpose, no sense of drive. What am I supposed to be doing in this world? And I created a lot of drama and toxicity in my life because I needed that feedback, right? That constant feedback of like, that's good or that's not good. And this is where you can improve. And this is where you need to change and things of that nature.
Oh, yeah. I understand that. And it's funny when you talk about toxicity, I understand this a lot. I had an affinity for things that could kill you. Not that I was trying to kill myself, but I loved being so close to death that when you finished an event, you were shaking because you were just so filled with adrenaline, the rush. I love a rush, but that rush was a great coping mechanism. It really was. I loved riding a motorcycle at high rate of speeds. I loved driving a car at high rates of speeds. I love being in an airplane and pushing the stick forward and watching it just dip. I love those feelings. I love that sense of fear that then turns into I've got a little bit of control. And then you realize I'm controlling some of it, but not all of it. There's a little bit of fate there. I love living on that edge. Is it wise? No, it was pathological, I think. In hindsight, I mean, I still like speed, don't get me wrong, but I was doing it to the degree where it could have been very damaging, not just to me, but to others. And it was a coping mechanism. It made me feel alive. And when you talk about identity, there was a point where I was told by a significant person that I'm a bad dad. When the mother of your children calls you a bad dad, when your wife calls you a bad dad, that crushed me. It crushed me because it was the one thing I really wanted to be good at. And they knew that. That's probably why they said it. It took so much out of me to hear that, because I think I accepted that for a little while. Based on my occupation, I was gone a lot. I was like, I am a bad dad. It totally ruined what I thought of when I looked at myself and my identity. And it was like, I'm a bad dad. So I would go on trips, and every time I came back, I'd always have a gift for the children. And it was a guilt gift. It was me trying to be a good dad. It was trying to be a good dad. When I retired, I wanted to have a job that enabled me to be able to go to all of their events and not miss any more events. So it did change me in some ways. And I'm not going to say if it's negative or positive. I'm just going to say that it changed me. It affected my identity. And some of that was probably negative. Some of it was positive. Some of it just was. But it's interesting to know that what people say, the feedback you get from other people, can affect how you see yourself in the world and how you identify. And I had to fight, because I identified with that for a long time. I was like, I'm a bad dad. And I realized at some point, no, I'm not. Which was good, because I had the opportunity to evolve and reassess and redefine that part of my identity as being a great dad, which is what I am now.
Well, and I think the beauty in that is that you're owning that identity. Yeah. Your actions, your choices, everything about that identity of being a great dad, of being a loving caretaker, right? Everything about that is yours.
Yes.
It's not based off of the feedback that you're getting from a third party, right? Yes. It's based off of the interactions and relationships and the dynamic that you have directly with your child, yes, your children, or whomever that one-on-one relationship is.
Absolutely.
And you get to own that. And yes, so no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what the feedback of the third party individual is, it's not going to have that same level of impact, because you are so grounded in the knowledge that you've established that relationship on your own. You are a loving caretaker. Identify as a loving caretaker.
Yes. And it's beautiful for me in hindsight, knowing that that changed, that evolved. So where you start, your start point does not determine your finish point, your end point. So
that's right.
It's good to know that we can evolve, we can move on, we can modify, we can refine ourselves, because inherently we are not the same people decade over decade. Every 7 to 8 years, we change. We change our beliefs,
I'm saying change. Like in
okay, every 2 years.
Speed, I know, with the speed of our life. World, I mean, we're talking like 18 months to 2 years. Yes. We have had to evolve.
Yes. Especially
things are changing so quickly, and we are being constantly bombarded again.
Yeah.
We're constantly being bombarded with new information and new insights. So
absolutely.
But part of that is that when we do that inner work, when we really look inside and we really try to assess, what is it that makes me away from all of everything that's going on in my life.
Yes.
Everything that is a circumstance, or even my loved ones. What makes me that I want to carry forward? And then maybe there's something that I don't want to carry forward, and I can really look and be intentional with replacing it with something else.
Yes.
Right?
Strong roots. Those are strong roots. What you're saying is grounding yourself and having such a strong base that when life happens to change that and alter that, you are still grounded in who you are. That is powerful. And it's a message that I wish I had adopted earlier in life. I would have saved myself some grief and some beef and some pain. But I'm glad that I know that now. I am so glad I know that now. So one thing you have to think about is there are ways that you can deepen and clarify your sense of identity. And those are things that you want to focus on. Learning who you are, learning what you value. When Michelle talked about core values earlier, that was it. Who are you? What are your hard stops? What are the things that you will not go for? Like Hall & Oates say, I can't go for that. What is that thing? You want to know what those things are. Yes, you can laugh at me all. I love Hall & Oates. Don't judge me.
I went to their concert. It's fine. I
Seriously?
have no judge.
I would love to go to a Hall & Oates concert.
I'm just laughing because, literally just dated ourselves. Like,
Hey.
So epic.
Okay.
Okay. Right. It's fine. That being said, I want to go back to your point of I'm glad I know now what I know now.
Yes.
And had I known then what I know now, what would life look like? And we just had this conversation
we did
offline.
Yes.
And so if you're listening to this right now and there's somebody that's really struggling with identity, you don't have to send them this podcast. Go ahead and send it to them if you think it would help. But just broaching the subject of being versus doing, right?
Yes.
That is so powerful and something that can, really change a young adult's life. That what you're doing right now isn't who you are at the root of who you are, right? It's not your core. And it's not something that's going to necessarily be forever. So let's really look at what's important to you and what you want to bring forward. Kids these days, I mean, I know I'm an adult and I am affected by social media. I am affected by news. I am affected by media, all of these things. Imagine our kids, right? So maybe just having that conversation with them about, what do you think your identity is? And not telling them that that's wrong, but just getting really curious. Yeah. And ask them, what do you think that means? If they're like, well, I'm a basketball player or I'm a, straight A student. And you're like, hold on. What do you think that means about you? Right?
Yes.
Just get curious. Just get curious. Just ask the open-ended questions. Don't tell them that they're wrong. Don't try to fix them. No. It's getting curious because you're teaching them to get curious about themselves and their own thoughts too. And that is something that's so powerful for young adults these days.
Everybody. I will tell you, people hate to hear it, but most people do not think. We do things by habit and rote and out of practice, but we don't think as much as we think we think. We like to think we do. We like to say we do. We don't think a lot. But giving yourself the time to just really pause and think, who am I? What do I identify as? Giving yourself that opportunity to really define that will help you to have boundaries, which gives you power, will help you to focus your attention and your energy and your efforts. It really can solidify your journey or help you to modify your journey or to make changes without the sense of guilt and pressure and things that can affect us in some ways.
Well said.
Why, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Well, we have spent a little bit of time chewing off your ear, did a little bit of chitting and chatting, but hopefully we added some value to your lives in a way that will benefit you, your community, your family, your workplace, and just help you to see things in a different light. Just understand the difference between being and doing. Knowing and thinking about the concept of the be, have, do constructs. Who are you? What do you have? What do you possess? And what do you do? And looking at that and seeing how it affects your life and see if you can use that in a positive way. So for today, we just want to say thank you. And if you've liked today, please click, subscribe, follow, share, and most importantly, use whatever adds value to your amazing life.
Remember, even if life puts barriers in our way, we're still moving forward. Sign in each Monday for a new episode of Winning Inside.
Take care, folks.
Thank you for listening to Winning Inside with Cheddy Matthews and Michelle Wickman. If you enjoyed today's show, please make sure to click the follow button, rate and review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or wherever you get your podcast. You can connect with Cheddy and Michelle at winninginside.io. Keep listening. Another episode is coming soon.